Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the poppy-stained underbelly of world history, a place where emperors weep, poets hallucinate, and the phrase gateway drug takes on a whole new meaning. That's right. Tonight, you're about to experience the complete, blissfully disastrous, and occasionally hilarious history of opium. The plant, the myth, the diplomatic hand grenade that took down dynasties and jump-started global trade. If you've ever looked at a bag of sleepy time tea and thought, this needs more international intrigue, this is the episode for you. Before you get too cozy, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of thing. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. So, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that sweet white noise, and settle in. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered, what did the world's most infamous plant actually smell like? Could you, as a 19th century noble, survive a night at a Chinese opium den without embarrassing yourself on the divan? Would your empire fall because you couldn't resist the urge for one more medicinal dose? Did Queen Victoria ever try the stuff? Or did she just look like she did? Is it true that ancient Sumerians called opium the joy plant, and did their parties get as weird as that sounds? And if your boss offered you a job running the East India Company, would you take it? Or just run screaming into the poppy fields? Because, congratulations, you've just woken up somewhere between a smoky Shanghai lounge, an Ottoman palace pharmacy, and a colonial trading post where the only HR policy is don't let the emperor find your stash. The year is well, pick one. This story never really ends, and neither does the trouble. Good luck. Long before it toppled empires, opium was just a pretty flower in the wild gardens of Mesopotamia. Imagine being an ancient Sumerian, poking at a sticky poppy pod and thinking, what could possibly go wrong? Spoiler, everything. Let's set the scene. The year is somewhere around 3500 BCE, give or take a century. You, dear listener, are not a world leader or a shaman, just an ordinary Sumerian, with a spectacular beard and a healthy suspicion of snakes. Your city-state is little more than a cluster of sun-baked mud brick houses, a couple of goats, and an existential rivalry with the neighbors over whose god is best at flood control. Out in the fields, you spot a flash of scarlet, the opium poppy, petals shimmering in the desert sun, looking way too dramatic for a plant that's basically a weed. Now, you don't have TikTok or a health and wellness podcast, so your sources for new products are limited to things a neighbor tried and survived, and stuff the local priest mumbles about. But here's the thing, these poppies are special. You break open the seed pod and find a milky, sticky ooze. Does it taste good? Not particularly. Does it make you feel weird? Absolutely. The Sumerians called this hulgil, the joy plant, which, for history, is a pretty strong endorsement. Nobody ever wrote a poem about their joy rutabaga. The first thing you notice, after a curious taste test, is that you're suddenly less concerned about the blisters on your feet, and the fact that your boss, the local priest king, thinks taxes should be paid in barley and sheep. Pain, hunger, and the sound of the neighbor's screaming baby all seem distant. Is this a religious experience, a medicine, or just another ancient life hack that will absolutely backfire in a few centuries? Trick question, it's all three. Poppy juice becomes the MVP of the ancient world's medicine cabinet. Got a toothache? Rub some poppy on it. Having trouble sleeping? Try a little more. Need to survive a particularly long religious festival in honor of a storm god with control issues? Double dose. Soon enough, the Sumerian temples are growing poppies right alongside their sacred grain. Clay, tablets. Imagine the world's first sticky note. Record poppy-based remedies for everything from insomnia to excessive sadness. Which, considering the plumbing situation, was probably a regular complaint. Now, the joy plant doesn't stay a Sumerian secret for long. Ancient traders are basically the original influencers. Merchants head upriver and down, taking little bags of dried poppy juice to Egypt, Persia, and points beyond. Picture you, the proud Sumerian, sidling up to a reed boat with a handful of mystery goo and a big sales pitch. Try this. It makes funerals much more tolerable. Word spreads. Within a few hundred years, the opium poppy is everywhere. Painted on Minoan pottery, brewed in Egyptian tomb tea, and quietly fueling the world's least productive afternoons. By the time you realize what you've started, everyone's in on the secret. Egyptian pharaohs prescribed poppy potions for colicky babies. The Assyrians, never a people accused of moderation, are distilling poppy sap and using it as both painkiller and hangover cure. Even the Greeks, usually too busy inventing democracy and tragic theatre, take time to write flowery poems about sleep, dreams, and a certain gift from the gods that just happens to make life bearable. You watch as the poppy, once just another plant in your city's backyard, becomes the subject of cults, legends, and some very questionable medical advice. You're proud and a little nervous. After all, you didn't invent civilization's favorite plant-based disaster. You just helped it find its roots. And so, the world's longest, strangest relationship begins, not with a bang, but with a slightly drowsy whimper. Out in the garden, the poppies keep growing, innocent and dangerous, promising relief and mischief in equal measure. You can almost hear them whisper on the breeze. What could possibly go wrong? And you, lucky Sumerian, are the first to learn everything and nothing all at once. Welcome to the Garden of Sleep. Good luck getting up tomorrow. You're a priest in ancient Sumer, selling poppy juice as the latest mood enhancer. Now the Egyptians show up, bottle it, slap a god's face on it, and call it divine medicine. Congratulations, you've invented pharmaceutical branding. Let's rewind a little. You've spent years mastering the art of Sumerian priesthood, herding goats, interpreting dreams, and maintaining that beard with the dedication of a modern influencer. In your spare time, you tend a sacred garden behind the temple, where you grow barley, herbs, and your personal favorite, the opium poppy. You've been refining your recipe for poppy sap tea, and your followers are extremely into it. The temple is raking in clay tablets of gratitude from locals claiming their back pain has vanished. Their nightmares have stopped, and their marriages feel slightly more tolerable. You're basically running the ancient equivalent of a spa/mystical apothecary. But across the desert, a new player enters the scene. Egypt, land of pyramids, eyeliner, and a suspiciously advanced understanding of marketing. Egyptian traders arrive in your ziggurat courtyard with jars of honey, gold trinkets, and questions about your sleepy plant. You offer them a taste, and they nod slowly, eyes unfocusing, like they've just remembered all their past lives at once. They say they're interested, which is ancient code for, "We're going to make millions off this." And they do. Back in Thebes, the Egyptians get busy. They don't just replicate your poppy potion, they enhance it. They mix it with wine, store it in colorful amphorae, and rebrand it as a sacred gift from the gods. They slap Hathor's name on the label, the goddess of music, joy, and not coincidentally, intoxication. Suddenly, poppy juice isn't just a sleepy time tea. It's divine nectar, blessed by the heavens and available at your local temple pharmacy for a very competitive donation. You hear rumors from traveling merchants. Egyptians are burying jars of opium, infused wine with the dead, offering it to the sick, and administering it during religious ceremonies. It's pain relief and spiritual alignment in one convenient dose. And unlike your gritty temple brew, theirs comes in a lovely ceramic jar with hieroglyphs promising eternal bliss and reduced inflammation. You've been outbranded by a civilization that mummifies cats for fun. Meanwhile, they're doctors, actual professionals with shaved heads and terrifyingly sharp bronze tools, begin recording dosages on papyrus scrolls. They're writing medical case studies like, Day 4, patient still high, back pain mostly gone. Also, thinks he's a crocodile. Your Sumerian methods, by comparison, now look like a DIY poppy stand at a farmer's market. But here's the twist. The Egyptians aren't content with mere local distribution. Their priests and physicians start exporting their divine concoctions up and down the Nile and beyond. By 1300 BCE, opium has become ancient medicine's golden child. It's the go-to for headaches, grief, nightmares, childbirth, and any situation that might require not feeling things for a while. Sound familiar? You, back in sit under the stars clutching a half-finished cuneiform tablet, wondering how your humble joy plant turned into international business. You're simultaneously honored and annoyed. On the one hand, your sleepy little garden sparked a medical revolution. On the other, the Egyptians are getting all the credit and probably cornering the market on artisanally decorated poppy jars. Still, as you sip a cup of your original blend, staring at the horizon and wondering what future civilizations will do with this power, you feel a strange mix of pride and unease, because you know the truth. You didn't just invent medicine, you invented marketing. And if history has taught you anything, it's that people will buy anything if it comes with a god's face and a catchy slogan. And somewhere in the distance you hear the whisper of petals in the wind, soft and sly. What could possibly go wrong? Plato says moderation in all things. But have you seen what's in the wine at his dinner parties? By the time Rome gets hold of opium, it's in every remedy, and, probably, every senator's goblet. You wake up in ancient Athens with a hangover strong enough to rewrite the Nicomachean Ethics. You're a student of philosophy, which mostly means drinking heavily and asking questions nobody wants to answer, like, what is truth? And, does the soul have a nose? The symposium last night went long. There was wine, there were figs, and there was something in the wine that made you think the walls were breathing. That something, as it turns out, was opium. By the 5th century BCE, the Greeks have fully embraced the poppy. You might find it in a pain balm, a tincture for the nerves, or sneakily stirred into a carafe of party punch by a philosopher with a flair for dramatic monologues. Even Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, and a man who once diagnosed a broken arm with the words, "Yep, that's broken," endorsed the poppy as a legitimate tool in the ancient medical kit. Stomachache? Try opium. Melancholy? Opium. Existential dread because Socrates won't stop talking about death? You guessed it. Greek physicians, always the multitaskers, record their opium-laced experiments in handwritten scrolls that look suspiciously like today's prescription pads. If those pads included poetic side effects like visions of the underworld and occasional divine communion, it was pain relief meets personality shift. One dose, and you're either deeply contemplative or dancing with a statue of Apollo. But as with all great human inventions, the Romans saw the Greeks using something cool and immediately asked, "Can we make it weird?" You've now time-traveled to Rome in the 1st century BCE. You're at a banquet hosted by a wealthy patrician who introduces himself by shouting, "I am the sun," and serving peacock tongues on silver trays. At your elbow, a goblet of wine so heavily infused with poppy sap that it smells like a floral crime scene. You take a sip. Goodbye, social anxiety. Hello, vivid hallucination of Cicero riding a dolphin. Romans, ever the overachievers, took what the Greeks started and added scale, flair, and occasionally vomitoriums. Opium, or meconium, as they sometimes called it, was now everywhere. Apothecaries sold it in powders, syrups, and mysterious black cakes. Soldiers rubbed it on wounds, senators swirled it into their bathwater, and poets, always the most dangerous group, used it to awaken their muse, which usually meant collapsing dramatically under a laurel tree and composing 40-line odes to sleep. By the time of Galen, Rome's most famous physician, opium, had reached its golden age. Galen prescribed it for headaches, insomnia, indigestion, grief, and pretty much anything that made daily life less than thrilling. His advice? Use sparingly. Roman translation: put it in everything. Always. You could walk into a Roman pharmacy with a stubbed toe and walk out with a week's supply of something that would knock out a war elephant. Of course, there were warnings. Some Roman thinkers, stoic killjoys, mostly, pointed out that maybe, just maybe, relying on a plant that made you see your ancestors wasn't a long-term strategy. But these voices were mostly ignored in favor of people who argued that if the gods didn't want you to enjoy opium, they wouldn't have made it taste so earthy. And so, from Plato's punch bowl to Nero's private stash, the joy plant became part of daily life. Not just for healing, but for entertainment, inspiration, and the occasional political bribe. You lie back on a marble couch, stomach full of olives, head full of clouds, and realize that ancient civilization wasn't built on logic and order. It was built on a surprisingly small flower and the wildly optimistic belief that no one would overdo it. Spoiler, they did. The Silk Road, camels, spices, and a suspiciously relaxed merchant class. You're hauling silk east, but your real cargo is poppy sap. Every stop is another customs checkpoint, and every bribe is paid in dreams. Welcome to the most overworked, underpaid, and over-scented trade route in human history. It's somewhere around 200 CE, and you're a merchant with a sunburned face, aching knees, and a caravan of camels that hate you. You've just crossed the Pamir Mountains, survived bandits, dodged taxes in 3 languages, and bartered for yak butter with a man who thinks deodorant is a personal insult. You're exhausted, but not worried. Why? Because tucked under those bolts of Chinese silk and pouches of cinnamon bark is the one product that everyone wants and no one wants to talk about. Opium. Yes, the joy plant is now big business, quietly, unofficially, and with enough plausible deniability to keep everyone just nervous enough. You started in the Eastern Mediterranean, picking up dried poppy cakes from a Greek supplier with too many rings and not enough honesty. You wrapped them in oilcloth, tucked them under your cargo, and told your guards they were herbal remedies, which technically isn't a lie. If the herbs cause out-of-body experiences and spontaneous poetry, that's not your fault. Every stop on the Silk Road has its own flavor. Oasis, cities bursting with gossip, wandering monks debating the soul, and customs officers who could smell untaxed cinnamon from 300 feet away. They check your official inventory. Silk, yes. Saffron, yes. Opium? You smile. No, just medicinal paste. They raise an eyebrow. You offer a sample. 10 minutes later, they're giggling at their own sandals and waving you through. You're not alone. All along the trade route, opium moves quietly, tucked into spice sacks, bundled with tea, or disguised as incense. Monasteries buy it in bulk, for meditation. Nobles keep it in jewel boxes. Healers insist it's for extreme toothaches. Everyone's in on the joke, and no one wants to be the one to ask if this stuff might be just a little addictive. And yet, demand grows. By the time you reach Central Asia, entire cities are built on the backs of this sleepy little flower. Caravanserais, basically ancient truck stops, are full of merchants hawking rugs, rhinos, and remedies. You lay out your wares. A scholar buys silk for his patron. A court musician buys cinnamon to disguise the smell of his camel. And then, quietly, a royal courier slips you a coin and asks for something to help the emperor sleep. You hand over a polished jar of poppy resin and pretend it's just for aromatherapy. But the deeper you go, the more tangled things get. In India, they're growing their own now. In China, the upper classes are mixing opium into teas and tinctures, claiming it enhances clarity. And in the Buddhist monasteries of Tibet, monks float through incense clouds so thick you could lose a camel in them. The joy plant has become a kind of spiritual Swiss Army knife, medicine, meditation aid, diplomatic gift, and emergency bribe rolled into one. You, the eternally tired trader, don't ask questions. You just count coins and hope the customs guards don't suddenly grow a conscience. Because there's one unspoken rule on the Silk Road. If a buyer asks too many questions, they're either an undercover official or already high. Either way, it's best to smile, nod, and recommend a half dose. As the sun sets over the dunes and your camels finally settle down, after spitting on you one last time, you light a small fire and open your personal stash. One dab of poppy sap on the tongue, and the wind seems to hush. The stars twinkle a little more kindly. The road ahead still stretches for weeks, but for now, all you feel is warmth, quiet, and the faint satisfaction of being part of history's shadiest pharmaceutical supply chain. Sleep well, merchant. Tomorrow, the desert starts again. You're a court physician in Baghdad, busy inventing algebra and anesthesia. But behind the apothecary door, opium, as essential as your favorite abacus. Side effects may include conquering most of Spain. The year is roughly 900 CE, and you live in a city that makes Renaissance Europe look like it's still eating glue. Baghdad is the crown jewel of the Islamic Golden Age, a metropolis of shimmering domes, candlelit libraries, and street markets that smell like rosewater and camel breath. You, lucky soul, are not just any healer. You're one of the caliph's personal physicians, which means you're expected to cure migraines, fevers, anxiety, heartbreak, and the occasional plague with style. Your medical kit is a masterpiece of the age. Copper scalpels, silver syringes, scrolls full of Greek translations, and somewhere near the bottom, a velvet pouch of dried opium resin that you insist is for advanced patients only. You keep it next to your notes on algebraic bloodletting ratios, just in case you ever need to mathematically justify knocking someone out. Because here's the thing, opium is the quiet superstar of medieval Islamic medicine. Wrapped in philosophical restraint and scientific curiosity, it's used in ways that would make a modern pharmacist break into a nervous sweat. You grind it into pills for pain, steep it in honey for sleep, and mix it with vinegar for ailments that don't even have names yet. One of your colleagues swears it cured his cousin's melancholy. Another claims it helped him solve a riddle about parallel universes. Honestly, at this point, you're not ruling anything out. And you're not alone. Across the Abbasid Caliphate, from Andalusia to Samarkand, doctors, scholars, and polymaths are scribbling notes on this curious plant. Avicenna, your intellectual hero, and possibly the only man alive who understands both medicine and metaphysics, includes opium in the canon of medicine, a book so influential it will be used in European universities for the next 600 years. His recommendation? Use it wisely, which is medieval for don't be a moron. But moderation is tricky when your patients are caliphs, viziers, poets, and occasional conquerors. One moment you're prescribing a low dose for battlefield surgery. The next, the Sultan is asking for something to help him sleep through the stress of ruling 3 time zones. You offer a single dose of opium syrup. Watch him float off into bliss, and pray he doesn't develop a habit strong enough to sink a boat. Outside the palace walls, the world is booming. Hospitals, by Maristans, are popping up everywhere, with entire wings dedicated to sleep, recovery, and sometimes philosophical debate between 2 patients high on medicinal poppy. You hear of traveling doctors using opium to anesthetize patients before surgery. You even meet a man in Damascus who swears he extracted a rotting tooth while reciting poetry, thanks to a pinch of resin and a very patient assistant. Still, not everyone's thrilled. Religious scholars argue about the moral implications of a drug that can disturb the soul's clarity. You nod respectfully, then sneak a poppy-based elixir into your evening tea, just to take the edge off another lecture about temperance. You're not addicted, you're just committed to your craft. As you stand in your marble-floored apothecary, sunlight streaming through stained glass and the scent of mint and opium hanging gently in the air, you realize something profound. Medicine is not just about healing the body. It's about understanding the balance between help and harm, between logic and mystery. And sometimes, it's about making sure the caliph doesn't freak out before a big military campaign. So you tidy your cabinet, adjust your turban, and prepare your next mixture. A pinch of wisdom, a drop of honey, and just enough poppy to soothe without sedating. Science, after all, is a careful art. And you, dear physician, are history's quiet magician, armed with scrolls, syrups, and the world's most controversial flower. Sweet dreams, Baghdad. The medicine cabinet is always open. Somewhere in a European monastery, a monk is grinding poppy seeds into a questionable tea. It's not sinful if it's for research, right? Welcome to medieval medicine. 10% faith, 90% guessing, 100% sleepy. It's the 12th century. And you're not just a monk. You're the local expert in every field that requires literacy, bandages, or vague Latin. You grow herbs, you copy manuscripts, and you're pretty sure you're a pharmacist, even though your formal training consists of God will guide your hand and one conversation with a passing herbalist who sneezed the entire time. You are, in short, the medieval healthcare system. Your monastery garden is a miracle of overgrowth. Rows of lavender for calm, rosemary for memory, and somewhere in the back, a modest patch of opium poppies, technically listed under pain relief, but more realistically, under don't ask. You harvest the seed pods with the care of a man who's been awake for 40 hours praying, tending the sick, and trying not to strangle Brother Thomas, who won't stop humming during Vespers. Today's patient is a knight who rode in yesterday with a cracked rib, a broken ego, and the breath of someone who mistook a wineskin for hydration. He's pale, sweaty, and requesting divine intervention, preferably in the form of anything that will stop his head from throbbing like a cathedral bell tower. You nod solemnly. Crush some poppy seeds with a mortar that's technically used for spices, and brew him a tea that smells faintly like regret and possibly cheese. Now, opium in the Middle Ages wasn't quite the pharmaceutical superweapon it would become later, but it was still a favorite among monastic healers, battlefield medics, and anyone with a low tolerance for screaming. You call it the soporific remedy, which sounds very official and helps you ignore the fact that you're eyeballing dosages like a medieval bartender guessing how drunk is too drunk. The theological justification is flexible. Technically, altering one's consciousness could be considered sinful, but you, ever the creative theologian, point out that if God didn't want people to use poppies, he wouldn't have made them so effective at quieting heretics with migraines. Plus, it's not recreational, it's research. You've written at least 2 pages of observations. One of them even has punctuation. Word spreads. Before long, people are arriving at your abbey with mysterious aches, stubborn coughs, and a desire to consult the learned brother with the calming tea. You develop a reputation as a miracle worker, which is flattering until you realize they're also using you to dodge penance. One man pretends to have a sore knee just to score a cut before choir practice. You don't call him out. He brought honey. And so, like everything else in medieval Europe, opium becomes part of the sacred and the slightly ridiculous. It's stirred into tinctures, buried in poultices, and sometimes just chewed outright by monks who claim it helps them commune with the divine. One friar swears he met an angel after 3 spoonfuls. You suspect he met a tree and had a conversation with it. But who are you to judge? Of course, not everything goes smoothly. Dosages vary wildly. Side effects range from hiccups to temporary sainthood. And once, you had to explain to an archbishop why half the novices slept through Easter Mass. Still, in a world where most medical advice includes leeches, prayers, and occasionally yelling at demons, your sleepy tea is a breakthrough. You log your findings in a leather-bound volume titled Cure ex herbis et gratia, Cures from Herbs and Grace. It becomes a minor classic in your region, passed down from monk to monk, until someone spills mead on it and blames the cat. As you tuck into your own humble cup after a long day of divine guesswork, you gaze out at the stars and think, maybe healing isn't about certainty. Maybe it's about comfort, care, and a warm drink that makes people stop screaming. And maybe, just maybe, God knew exactly what he was doing when he gave the world a flower that could knock out a Viking. Sleep well, brother. The bells will ring again at dawn. You've stubbed your toe in 16th century Venice. The apothecary hands you a vial of laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol. You're suddenly convinced you can paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel with your toes. Welcome to the Renaissance, where everything is either being rediscovered, retranslated, or redrunk. Venice is booming, trade is humming, painters are hallucinating, and the canals smell like innovation and something vaguely fishy. You, dear citizen, are trying to survive the sheer chaos of this cultural explosion with minimal injury. Which is tricky, because cobblestones are sharp, shoes are decorative at best, and people keep fencing in the street like it's cardio. So, naturally, when you jam your foot against a marble column during a particularly dramatic exit from a wine tasting, you hobble to the nearest apothecary. Inside, a man who looks like he's either 30 or 85, hard to tell in this era, nods wisely and hands you a tiny bottle of laudanum. It smells like vinegar, regret, and a very bad idea. But hey, it's the Renaissance. Everyone's experimenting. Laudanum, opium dissolved in wine or brandy, is the era's catch-all remedy. Invented by Paracelsus, a Swiss alchemist who believed illness came from imbalances in your body's mystical inner vibes, probably not the official term, laudanum is immediately embraced as the next big thing. Headache? Laudanum. Toothache? Laudanum. Boredom during an art lecture? Double laudanum. It's basically herbal medicine's chaotic older cousin. You take a sip and feel a gentle warmth bloom behind your eyeballs. The pain in your toe disappears. So does your anxiety about dying in a canal, your fear of heights, and, unfortunately, your filter. You begin passionately describing your vision for a fresco of Saint Sebastian playing the lute to a crowd of ducks. The apothecary claps. A career is born. But it's not just you. All across Europe, laudanum is becoming the go-to prescription. Doctors are mixing it with everything from clove oil to powdered pearls. Nobles carry it in jewel-encrusted vials. Artists use it to loosen the mind. And poets? Let's just say 80% of all Renaissance sonnets could legally be labeled under the influence. If someone you know is suddenly weeping at the moon and painting fruit with alarming sensuality, odds are laudanum is involved. Of course, like all miracle cures, there's a catch. Dosage is more of a vibe than a science. Apothecaries often measure in drops or until the patient stops talking, which leads to more than a few unfortunate incidents of eternal sleep. There's a fine line between muse-kissed genius and guy who forgot how windows work. Still, nobody seems overly concerned. It's the Renaissance. People regularly drill holes in their heads to cure headaches. This is mild. At royal courts, laudanum becomes the secret behind every serene monarch portrait. Queen Elizabeth I reportedly had it on hand for nerves, and French nobles mixed it with perfume, because nothing says sophistication like smelling faintly of poppies and ethanol. You're invited to a salon where someone claims laudanum helps them commune with angels. Someone else just uses it to sit through madrigal concerts without crying. But laudanum isn't just a party favor. It's also the first real step toward modern pharmaceuticals. Medical texts begin including it as a standard remedy. Universities lecture about its uses. There's even rudimentary discussion of tolerance, though most doctors still think addiction is just a moral failing or a sign of being French. You, of course, are now deep in your third dose, lounging in a gondola, composing a heartfelt letter to Leonardo da Vinci about how doors are just slow-moving walls. Your toe? Completely healed. Your dignity? Less so. But your spirit? Transcendent. As the sun sets over the glittering canals and the sounds of lute music drift across the water, you lie back and let the laudanum do its thing. The Renaissance is alive. The world is beautiful. And somewhere, someone is absolutely painting a ceiling with their toes. Sleep well, Venetian visionary. Tomorrow, you might invent a sonnet, or forget how stairs work. Either way, history thanks you. Meet the only civilization with enough tea to caffeinate the planet. And now, thanks to a few enterprising traders, enough opium to sedate it. Spoiler. This ends in a very long, very awkward family meeting with Britain. You are a Qing dynasty official. In 18th century China, proudly maintaining the world's most sophisticated bureaucracy, managing a sprawling empire, and sipping your third cup of jasmine tea while wondering why your nephew is suddenly writing poetry about clouds and forgetting how chairs work. At first, you assume it's just puberty. Then you open his writing desk and find a tiny pipe and a bag of something sticky that smells faintly of doom. Welcome to the opium era in China, a period when everything seems fine until suddenly nothing is. At this point in history, China is doing pretty well. The Forbidden City is bustling. The civil service exam is still ruining lives, and you're exporting tea, porcelain, and silk like there's no tomorrow. Western nations want your stuff. They need your stuff. But there's a problem. They don't have anything you actually want. British silver reserves are draining faster than their patience, and they're not about to give up on their national tea addiction. Enter the East India Company stage left, twirling its moustache and carrying several tons of Indian-grown opium. You know, for medical use. At first, the opium trickles in quietly. A few merchants here, a few coastal traders there. It's unofficial. It's under the table. It's very much illegal. And yet, somehow, it's everywhere. You start hearing rumors from Canton. Wealthy elites are spending more time lying on couches than running businesses. Local scholars are too dazed to finish their Confucian essays. Farmers trade rice for something that makes them forget they have to farm at all. You investigate. The answer? Poppy sap. Imported, potent, and, let's be honest, alarmingly good at making people stop caring about literally anything. And who's supplying it? The British. Or more precisely, a corporation operating with the moral compass of a wet sponge and the diplomatic subtlety of a cannon. They buy opium in India, ship it to China, and trade it for silver, which they then use to buy more tea, which they then sell back home for a profit, which they then use to buy more opium. It's capitalism, but make it dystopian. You, the official, are horrified. You draft stern memos. You issue imperial edicts. You even host anti-opium ceremonies where officials burn boxes of the stuff in great public displays of moral clarity. The British, in turn, accuse you of obstructing trade and respond by sending warships. This, dear listener, is the diplomatic equivalent of trying to return a bad Amazon purchase and getting punched in the face. And so begins the First Opium War. A conflict started, essentially, because you didn't want your people hooked on foreign narcotics. The British call it a matter of free trade. You call it a national crisis. They have steam-powered gunboats. You have moral outrage and a navy that hasn't fought anyone in centuries. The outcome? Let's just say it ends with China signing the Treaty of Nanking, giving Britain Hong Kong, opening several ports to opium merchants, and handing over enough silver to make your ancestors cry. And it doesn't stop there. Opium use skyrockets. By the mid-19th century, tens of millions of people across China are using it. Dens pop up like mushrooms after rain. Productivity drops. Corruption soars. Local officials are too high to collect taxes. Even soldiers show up to battle late, or not at all, because they're napping in a smoke cloud. You, now aged and exhausted, try to write a final report on the crisis, but the paper keeps blurring and someone is sobbing in the next room about a broken pipe, not the plumbing kind. The empire is fraying at the seams, and the poppy plant, once a symbol of healing, now haunts your dreams. China discovered the power of opium, but not in a lab, or a hospital, or even a monastery. No. It learned the hard way. Through addiction, invasion, and treaties written at gunpoint. And all because a few ambitious traders wanted their tea with a side of profit. Sleep tight, imperial administrator. Tomorrow, the British want to renegotiate. You stagger into a Shanghai opium den, trying to look cool and not cough up a lung. There are pillows, pipes, and enough smoke to blot out your life choices. It's the late 19th century, and you've either made it big or absolutely ruined your week. The opium den doesn't care which. You pass through the beaded curtains, brush against velvet drapes that haven't been washed since the Qing dynasty began, and take a moment to admire the ambience. It's somewhere between mystical retreat and someone set fire to a rug store. The scent? Sweet, earthy, and unmistakably narcotic. It's the perfume of forgetfulness, and it's hanging in the air like a lazy ghost. The room is dimly lit by lanterns shaped like flowers and questionable intentions. All around you, people lie in exquisite stillness. Some are reclined like Roman senators on a vision quest. Others look like they've merged with the cushions. There's a man in the corner, whispering secrets to a teacup. A woman on the far end has been staring at a lamp for 6 hours and is currently in love with it. Welcome to the Dream Salon. You take your place on a divan that's been sat on by more poets than chairs in Paris. An attendant silently hands you a long, snake-like pipe and a sticky black ball of opium the size of a grape. The preparation is delicate, ritualistic. Like making sushi, if the sushi could transport your soul to the astral plane. You heat the ball gently over a lamp, roll it onto the pipe's bowl, inhale and wait. At first, there's nothing. Then a tingling behind your eyes. Then your limbs turn into spaghetti noodles, and your spine becomes a philosophical concept. Thoughts melt. time stretches. You're no longer sure where your legs are, but you're 80% certain they're having a good time. This, you realize, is the point. Opium dens like this are scattered throughout Asia, Europe, and even the United States, especially in cities with large Chinese immigrant populations. In places like San Francisco, London's Limehouse district, and Saigon, dens are tucked behind laundries, down basement stairs, or inside buildings with no signage except the occasional very chill cat on the doorstep. They're social clubs, escape hatches, and the only places where staring at a ceiling for 8 hours is considered a legitimate activity. For a lot of people, the den is refuge. Laborers come here after back-breaking shifts, chasing relief from a world that doesn't particularly care if they survive it. Artists come chasing inspiration, because obviously nothing screams creative breakthrough like lying in a smoke cloud while your sense of self evaporates. Even bored aristocrats find their way in, drawn by the mystery, the scandal, and the whisper that real life is just too much work. But not everything is velvet pillows and slow jazz hallucinations. The truth is, the den also hides tragedy. Behind the surreal serenity is a quiet desperation. Addiction sinks in slow and soft, like the cushions you're melting into, and by the time you realize you've been coming here every day for weeks, it's already part of your bloodstream. Your dreams are no longer your own. Your plans? Postponed indefinitely. Reality? Optional. And of course, governments notice. Reformers, missionaries, and health officials burst in with moral panic and pamphlets. Police raids follow. Politicians write laws. Some try banning dens outright. Others just start regulating who's allowed to get high, when, and how expensively. You nod along, a little too late, still trying to remember your own name, or at least your exit strategy. As the lantern flickers above you and the smoke swirls into 1,000 little question marks, you realize this isn't just a room, it's a turning point, a place where civilizations meet, melt, and lose track of time. A crossroads of indulgence and oblivion, comfort and collapse, silk and sorrow. Sleep well, dreamer. The carpet won't fly, but for a while you'll swear it did. You always wanted to work in imports and exports. You didn't know it would involve enslaving half of India to grow poppies and bribing Chinese officials with a wink and a shipping manifest. Congratulations. You're now a proud employee of the British East India Company, the world's most casually villainous multinational, operating somewhere between Amazon and a pirate ship. The year is the late 18th century. Your uniform is crisp. Your morals are negotiable. Your job? Technically trade. Realistically, narcotics distribution, colonial oppression, and making polite conversation with governors who have never once buttoned their collars correctly. Let's not sugarcoat it. The East India Company isn't here to share culture and build bridges. It's here for money. Specifically, money made from turning Indian soil into opium plantations and using the resulting belled, sticky black goo to balance Britain's very expensive tea habit. Because you see, Britain loves tea. So much so that by this point, it's practically a national blood type. But China doesn't want anything Britain has to offer in return. They already have silk, porcelain, and existential melancholy. What they don't need? Wool. Or British manners. So, the solution? Manufacture demand. You grow opium in Bengal, lots of it. You force local farmers to dedicate their fields to poppy plants instead of, food. Entire villages become monoculture drug factories. If they resist, you raise their taxes or gently remind them of the military garrison parked 3 miles away. It's not personal, it's policy. Once harvested, the opium is processed in large, state-supervised factories where workers press the sticky paste into neat bricks, mark it with official seals, and pack it into chests destined for Chinese shores. You don't technically sell it in China. That would be illegal. Instead, you dump it in places like Canton, where independent middlemen, who coincidentally work for you, handle distribution. Think of it as plausible deniability meets smuggling with a side of empire. Meanwhile, your company rakes in the silver. Mountains of it. Enough to fund tea imports, palatial headquarters in London, and the occasional private army. Yes, your employer has its own army, over 200,000 strong, complete with uniforms, cannons, and a knack for resolving disputes by annexing provinces. You know, logistics. And it works until it doesn't. Opium addiction explodes across China. Officials write panicked letters to the emperor. Monks start seeing visions of poppy fields during meditation. Farmers abandon their tools. Soldiers stop showing up. The imperial court demands the trade stop. Britain responds by escalating it. You host meetings, issue statements, maybe even commission a flattering portrait of yourself in front of a ship full of poison. Eventually, China pushes back hard enough that someone in Parliament hears about it over breakfast and says, "That sounds like a war waiting to happen." And so, the First Opium War begins. British gunboats, sleek, steam-powered, and unapologetically overkill, blast their way up Chinese rivers. You claim it's about free trade. They claim it's about national survival. Both of you are technically right. Both of you are deeply, deeply wrong. The result? Treaties signed at gunpoint, trading ports forcibly opened, and Hong Kong handed over to Britain like a consolation prize. The East India Company, despite orchestrating one of the most destructive drug operations in world history, calls it a victory. Shareholders are thrilled. Somewhere, a farmer in India wonders where the rice went. A scholar in China wonders when the fog in his head will lift. And you, mid-level bureaucrat in a cravat, wonder if your job counts as noble service to the crown or just really aggressive customer service. But one thing is clear: you weren't in trade. You were in transformation of lands, laws, and lives. The British East India Company didn't just sell opium. It redesigned economies, toppled governments, and perfected the art of looking surprised when called out. Sleep tight, merchant of mischief. The next shipment's already at sea. You're a Chinese official desperately trying to ban opium. The British response? How about a little gunboat diplomacy? You learn the hard way that free trade isn't always very free. Let's rewind to the early 19th century. You're a respected Qing dynasty bureaucrat with excellent calligraphy, a deep sense of duty, and a headache that started around the time half your coastal provinces got addicted to imported plant goo. You've read the reports. Farmers abandoning their fields, soldiers too dazed to march, and entire districts that now smell like a sleepover in a burning herbalist shop. This isn't just a trade imbalance. This is a civilization wobbling on the edge of a pipe. You're not alone in your alarm. The emperor is furious. Opium is banned. Smugglers are to be punished. You, as an imperial envoy, are dispatched to Canton with orders to make this nonsense stop. Your job? Confiscate the drugs, arrest the dealers, and restore the moral fiber of the nation. Easy, except it isn't. Because those smugglers? They're British. Or more specifically, they're backed by the British East India Company, which, despite technically being a corporation, has more ships, guns, and smug self-assurance than some small countries. And the opium trade? It's not just tolerated. It's baked into the economy. The British are buying up tea like it's going out of style, and they need that sweet, sweet silver. But since they don't want to pay in silver anymore, they're flooding your ports with opium instead. which your people buy with silver, which the British then use to buy more tea. It's a financial Ouroboros. You hate it, so you do something bold. You seize over 20,000 chests of opium from British merchants and publicly destroy it. Not discreetly, not quietly. You throw a full anti-drug bonanza, complete with torches, speeches, and a symbolic cleansing of the port. The British are not thrilled. They demand compensation. You laugh politely and suggest they try not selling narcotics to a sovereign nation. They do not laugh back. Enter the gunboats. The First Opium War kicks off in 1839, and it is less a war than a very dramatic lesson in colonial overconfidence. Britain's ships are steam-powered, bristling with cannon, and disturbingly punctual. Your navy is enthusiastic, mostly wooden, and still figuring out what a steam engine is. British forces quickly bombard coastal forts, seize territory, and demand access to more trade ports. You send messages. Please. Official documents. Sealed with imperial stamps. Britain sends more boats. The Treaty of Nanking is signed in 1842. It is less a treaty and more a hostage negotiation. China cedes Hong Kong, opens 5 treaty ports, pays millions in reparations. Oh, and the opium trade? Still not banned, just more regulated. You feel like the losing party at a Monopoly game where someone flipped the board and now owns your house. But wait, it gets worse. In 1856, the Second Opium War begins. Why? Because a British registered ship flying a Chinese flag got boarded by Chinese officials, and Britain decided this was an act of war. Yes, really. You try explaining flag etiquette. Britain responds with more gunboats. France joins in, because nothing says international diplomacy like kicking someone when they're already bleeding opium from the ears. This time, Allied forces march all the way to Beijing. They burn the Summer Palace. You're told to sign another treaty, the Treaty of Tientsin, opening more ports, legalizing opium, and allowing foreign missionaries to roam freely. You, once a proud defender of order and virtue, now oversee a country humiliated, demoralized, and increasingly high. The Opium Wars weren't about freedom. They were about forcing access, economic, political, spiritual, by cannonball. You fought for sovereignty. They fought for market share. And in the end, the lesson you learned is that free trade often comes with a very expensive invoice, payable in silver, pride, and treaties that no one translates into Mandarin correctly. Sleep well, weary diplomat. Tomorrow, you'll have to explain to the Emperor why the British now own your best port and half your population is dreaming in poppy. Victorian England. Prim, proper, and quietly buzzed on tinctures. You sip your tea, watch the rain, and ignore the fact that your cough syrup would knock out a rhinoceros. It's the 19th century, and everything is lace, lamplight, and latent hysteria. You are a proper Victorian lady, or gentleman, depending on the hat, with a parlor full of patterned upholstery and a stomach full of highly questionable medicine. You have a slight cough, a touch of melancholy, and an alarming fondness for sentences that last half a page. But don't worry, Dr. Bumblethorpe has just the thing. It's called laudanum, and it comes in a charming little bottle with an even more charming lack of warning labels. You nod politely as the good doctor explains its soothing properties. He assures you it's completely safe, perfectly respectable, and highly recommended for everything from indigestion to heartbreak to existential dread brought on by too much reading, 1 teaspoon before bed, or whenever the weight of colonialism gets too heavy. You thank him, add a few drops to your chamomile tea, and immediately forget what you were upset about. Was it your husband's affair with the scullery maid? the economic inequality of the Industrial Revolution, your corset slowly collapsing your ribcage like a Victorian trash compactor? Doesn't matter. You feel floaty, delighted. A little like you've turned into a sentient fog, and you are not alone. Across the empire, millions are indulging in the same quietly euphoric lifestyle. Men take it for gout, women for female troubles, children for teething, which is Victorian for let's knock little Timmy out before he starts asking questions about the soot. Entire families are basically walking poppy fields in waistcoats, and it's all legal. You can buy laudanum at the corner chemist right next to the toothpaste made of chalk and the arsenic face cream. But the parlor is where the magic happens. It's where society gathers to exchange pleasantries, admire doilies, and slowly descend into a pleasantly numb fog. Writers wax poetic under the influence. Painters paint dreamscapes that may or may not feature talking rabbits. Housewives stare into the fire and feel okay for the first time all week. And when someone asks how you're doing, the answer is always quite well, because you've taken the Victorian equivalent of a horse tranquilizer, and everything feels just peachy. The upper classes, of course, do it with flair. Crystal decanters, velvet cushions, a discreet nod to tonics. You host a small gathering. Guests sip sherry, laced with laudanum, and nod knowingly during dramatic readings of Tennyson. No one blinks for 6 minutes. Someone forgets the word for door. Everyone agrees the evening was a rousing success. Meanwhile, medical journals are quietly starting to notice that maybe, just maybe, the public is a little too enthusiastic about this miracle cure. Reports come in. Dependency, hallucinations, people forgetting how to walk. One woman writes 400 pages of poetry in a week and then tries to marry a mirror. Still, the idea that laudanum might be dangerous is dismissed as hysteria. Ironically, hysteria is also treated with laudanum. Even Charles Dickens had opinions about it. He dabbled, he observed, and he included characters in his novels who were, let's say, enthusiastic users. Opium was becoming part of the cultural fabric, woven in with gas lamps, top hats, and the quiet sobbing of people trying to understand the railway schedule. Eventually, the government steps in. Sort of. By the late 1800s, murmurs about addiction reach Parliament. There are suggestions of regulation. Maybe a label? Maybe limit access for children? The chemists look shocked, and then offer a slightly milder syrup, now with mint. But the damage is done. Behind every stoic Victorian facade, behind every meticulously embroidered doily, behind every polite nod to the Queen, lies a nation quietly buzzing on what was essentially medical-grade poppy punch. So as the rain taps gently against your lace-curtained windows and the fire crackles softly, you pour one more teaspoon into your tea and lean back. The empire may be fraying, but your nerves? Absolutely not. Sleep well, parlor poet. Your tincture's working. It's the 19th century. A German chemist isolates morphine. Then, another creates heroin as a safe alternative. What could possibly go wrong? If you guessed literally everything, you're catching on. You're a brilliant chemist in 1804, and you've just isolated a new compound from opium. You call it morphium, after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams, which is either poetic or wildly irresponsible, depending on how things go. The initial results are thrilling. It's more potent than opium, easier to administer, and, at least on paper, less likely to cause problems. Doctors across Europe rejoice. Finally, a controlled, injectable way to dull pain without all that messy resin and inconsistent tea brewing. You sit in your lab, surrounded by flasks, journals, and a faint smell of burnt poppy, congratulating yourself on having revolutionized medicine. And to be fair, you kind of have. Morphine becomes the go-to anesthetic for battlefield surgery, childbirth, and any illness that involves wailing in Latin. By the time the American Civil War rolls around, it's being handed out like candy wrapped in gauze. Soldiers call it God's own medicine. You call it a job well done. But there's a problem. It's really good. Too good. So good, in fact, that people start inventing reasons to use it. Cough, morphine. Toothache, morphine. Existential crisis triggered by reading too much Goethe? Morphine. Within a few years, doctors realize that patients are less recovered and more permanently reclining with haunted eyes. Oops. Enter the next act in this scientific farce. Heroin. It's now 1874, and another German chemist, possibly bored or just trying to win a bet, decides to tweak morphine's molecular structure and, ta-da, invents heroin. The idea is that heroin will be a non-addictive, safer alternative to morphine. Because what's better than a powerful narcotic? A more powerful one that's faster and feels nicer. Pharmaceutical companies jump on it immediately. Bayer, the same company that gave the world aspirin, starts selling heroin as a cough suppressant. Yes, cough suppressant. They bottle it, brand it, and send it off to doctors with glossy pamphlets that say things like, safe, gentle, family-friendly. Children take it, mothers take it, grandmothers take it. Probably the cat takes it. It's everywhere. And to be fair, it does suppress coughing, mostly because you forget you have lungs. For a while, heroin is hailed as a miracle. Hospitals stock it in bulk. Doctors prescribe it for colds, colic, and anything remotely emotional. People start carrying little vials in their pockets for those pesky moments when life feels too awake. It's like Victorian essential oils. If the essential oil was a fast track to dependency. Meanwhile, addiction rates quietly skyrocket. Patients return for more refills. Doctors scratch their heads. Strange, they mutter. She seems to have developed a craving for cough syrup that causes her to talk to wallpaper. In cities like New York and London, heroin addiction starts to outpace morphine. It's a pharmaceutical relay race, and nobody's winning. Eventually, the red flags become too large to ignore. In the early 20th century, governments begin to regulate heroin. Slowly, hesitantly, like someone trying to take away a child's favorite toy without getting bitten. By 1924, the US officially bans heroin. Germany follows. Medical professionals sheepishly admit that perhaps non-addictive was a bit optimistic. Still, the legacy is cemented. Morphine and heroin have now reshaped modern medicine, modern addiction, and the entire pharmaceutical industry. They're the poster children of better living through chemistry. A phrase that works well on posters, but less well when your patient has been nodding off mid-sentence since Tuesday. And you, the chemist, sit in your quiet lab, surrounded by notebooks and the creeping suspicion that you may have accidentally changed the world in exactly the wrong way. Sleep tight, innovator. The pain might be gone, but the side effects are just beginning. You visit the 1880s doctor for a toothache. He prescribes soothing syrup for the pain, for your nerves, for your personality. Side effect: your soul leaves your body for a bit. It's 1878. Your tooth is pulsating with the angry vengeance of every bad decision you've ever made. And the neighborhood dentist has a sign out front that says, painless extractions. A phrase that, in this era, means possibly unconscious and maybe still alive. You enter the office, which smells like pipe smoke and regret. And the good doctor greets you with a moustache, a vest, and a firm handshake that feels like it could relocate your jaw on its own. After a quick look at your swollen gum, done with a candle and something that looks suspiciously like a crochet hook, he gives his verdict. You need relief. Now, modern, you might expect a root, canal, or maybe antibiotics. But this is the 1880s, when dentistry was still part theatre, part guesswork, and 100% chemistry experiment. So the prescription is simple. Soothing syrup. The label says it contains alcohol, chloroform, morphine, and something called calming spirits, which could be code for peppermint or just actual spirits. You drink it because you trust your doctor. 10 minutes later, your tooth still hurts, but you no longer care. In fact, you're pretty sure you just saw the wallpaper wink at you. You start composing a poem about your chair. Somewhere in the background, the dentist begins humming "Oh Susanna" while sharpening something metallic. This, dear listener, was the golden age of legally prescribed oblivion. The medical profession had finally embraced opium and its derivatives, not just as tools of healing, but as the backbone of the entire bedside manner. Doctors carried vials of morphine in their coat pockets. Dentists laced their cotton with laudanum. Pharmacists mixed custom syrups with the flair of bartenders and the medical ethics of raccoons. And it wasn't just for the ill or the wounded. Oh no, this was medicine for every occasion. Anxious? Morphine? Lonely? Laudanum? Can't sleep? Heroin. Suffering from a condition known as being a woman in the 19th century? Well then, try this delightful elixir for your nervous disposition. Side effects may include dancing with ghosts and forgetting your own name. Pediatricians weren't exempt either. In fact, one of the most popular over-the-counter products was Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, lovingly marketed to mothers as a cure-all for teething infants. The ingredients? Morphine sulfate and a mother's sense of denial. Children stopped crying, sure. They also stopped blinking. But hey, quiet baby, happy home, amnesia for everyone. Even veterinarians got in on the action. Got a cranky horse? A little opium in its feed. Dog limping? Syrup it up. Somewhere out there was a very mellow cow watching clouds and contemplating philosophy. Meanwhile, the medical journals of the day were still debating whether addiction was a moral weakness, a spiritual affliction, or a minor inconvenience best solved by doubling the dose. Some doctors genuinely believed withdrawal symptoms were just a phase. Others prescribed opium to treat opium withdrawal, which is like curing a hangover with tequila and a high five. But here's the wildest part. This wasn't quack medicine. These were licensed professionals, educated, well-intentioned. Some even wrote books, and they were all doing their absolute best with what they had, which, unfortunately, was a working knowledge of Latin, an unlimited supply of narcotics, and no idea what a neurotransmitter was. So you, slumped peacefully in the dentist's chair with half your molars and none of your anxiety, are experiencing the peak of 19th century healthcare. You won't remember the procedure. You probably won't remember your name. But you will wake up later with a tooth in your pocket, a vague sense of betrayal, and an unshakable craving for licorice and cloud watching. Sleep well, patient. The dentist has another bottle, and tomorrow someone's coming in for a sore knee. Spoiler, the treatment is the same. You're riding the range, dodging rattlesnakes and existential despair. Good news, your trusty saddlebag contains a tin of opium-laced lozenges. Bad news, so does everyone else's. It's the 1870s. The West is still wild. Your horse smells worse than your boots, and you're one bad sandwich away from cholera. But there's a tin in your saddlebag labeled Dr. McGillicuddy's celebrated calming cough pellets, and you've come to rely on them the same way you rely on whiskey, shade, and the occasional functioning outhouse. The label says it soothes sore throats, settles nervous afflictions, and quiets the demons of the soul. It's basically therapy in lozenge form, except it's made of sugar, sassafras, and a very generous amount of opium. You take one before breakfast. Your cough stops. So does your urge to punch the guy who stole your beans. You take another before bed and dream of prairie dogs reciting Shakespeare. You take a third just because the wind looked at you funny. Welcome to frontier medicine. You are not alone. From the saloons of Dodge City to the dusty general stores of Tombstone, opium is practically its own food group. Settlers pop pills, sip syrups, and chew on resin like it's trail mix. The mail-order catalogues offer tinctures for melancholia, elixirs for fatigue, and brain tonics, which is polite cowboy speak for liquid nap in a bottle. Nobody questions it. Nobody regulates it. Half the pharmacists are former gamblers who learned their trade from a pamphlet and a dream. Cowboys, ranchers, schoolmarms, snake oil salesmen, everyone's in on it. Traveling salesmen roll into town with painted wagons and catchy jingles, promising vitality, restful sleep, and the ability to forget your entire tragic backstory. You line up with your dusty neighbors, hand over a silver coin, and walk away with a bottle that smells like hope and turpentine. And let's not forget the gold miners. Imagine spending 12 hours a day smashing rocks in the hope of finding shiny flakes while breathing in enough dust to qualify as a sedimentary layer. You're sore, sunburnt, and one bad sneeze away from retirement. So when someone offers you a miracle remedy called Gumflower's Nervous Cure, you chug it, thank them, and forget how spoons work. Even children aren't spared. Parents give opium drops to babies teething on wooden toys and sadness. It works. Baby stops crying. Parents sleep for the first time in weeks. And the family dog probably gets into the leftovers. Everyone's mellow. Everyone's horizontal. It's the American dream, powdered and bottled. Doctors, at least the ones who aren't also the town, undertaker, hand out morphine like peppermint. Bullet wound? Morphine. Snake bite? Morphine. Stub toe on a cactus? Have some laudanum, lie down, and think about trains. In fact, during the Civil War, morphine addiction among veterans was so common it had a name: soldier's disease. And when those soldiers moved west, so did their habits. But let's not pretend this was all unintentional. The booming patent medicine industry made millions from frontier pharmacies. Labels featured majestic bison, stern eagles, or maternal figures gazing into the distance like they'd just seen God. And he offered her a bottle of cough syrup. The fine print? Usually something like guaranteed to contain no less than 15 grains of opium. That's a lot, especially for something you took before church. Still, for all the chaos, opium did what it said on the tin. It numbed. And in a world of injuries, infections, and unfiltered emotions, numbing was its own kind of salvation. Until, of course, people started noticing that the soothing syrup was making folks forget their own names, walk into wells, and spend 3 days talking to a fence post. Eventually, whispers of habit forming crept into the conversation. But the West had other things to worry about: bandits, droughts, and cows that refused to be herded. Besides, it was hard to kick a drug when your entire town was built on it, literally. Some general stores had a laudanum aisle. So you ride on. The sun sets, the wind howls, and somewhere in your saddlebag, a lozenge rattles quietly, your tiny, opium-laced companion for the long, dusty road ahead. Sleep well, cowboy. The prairie's quiet now, and so are you. Welcome to the world's first rehab center. It's the 1890s, and someone finally realizes that maybe, just maybe, 10% morphine in baby formula is a bad idea. Oops, You wake up in a modest room with a high ceiling, lace curtains, and a nurse who looks like she's been awake since the Crimean War. There's a crucifix on the wall, a pitcher of lukewarm water on the table, and absolutely no sign of your laudanum bottle. Welcome to treatment. The 19th century is finally starting to connect the dots. The world has spent the last 100 years chugging opium derivatives like their tea at a royal wedding. Morphine is in your medicine, heroin is in your cough syrup, and if you ask politely, the pharmacist might top off your order with a complimentary opium bonbon. But now, people are starting to notice a trend. A lot of those soothed patients, they're not getting better. They're just getting very, very quiet, permanently. Doctors begin describing strange symptoms, shaking hands, sweats, hallucinations, and an overwhelming urge to stare at the ceiling and weep about your childhood. Patients insist they need just one more dose to sleep, then one more after that. Then, oops, all the doses. For nerve stability. Entire families are fading into morphine fogs, and little Johnny still hasn't blinked since his last teething session. It's not a habit, they said. It's medicinal. It's not an addiction. It's just your constitution. And yet, an alarming number of those constitutions seem to be crumbling into puddles of dreams and broken piano music. The realization hits. This isn't healing, it's something else. So, someone, probably named Harold or Beatrice, gets the bright idea to start a facility just for people who need to, shall we say, take a break from their syrup habits. And thus, the world's first rehabilitation clinics are born. These aren't luxury spas, they're not even especially comfortable. But they are groundbreaking. Patients check in voluntarily, or semi-voluntarily, depending on how much their family loves them, often arriving in horse-drawn carriages, clutching their stomachs and muttering about how the wallpaper is whispering again. Treatments are experimental. Doctors aren't quite sure what addiction is yet, but they are quite sure they don't want to admit they may have caused it. The first step in treatment? Cold turkey. Not an actual turkey, though that would have been more humane. No, you get locked in a room, no opium, no morphine, no heroin, and definitely no tincture labeled for gloom. You sweat, you shake, you scream at a mirror. One man insists he's married to the floorboards. Another composes an opera about toast. Withdrawal is brutal, long, and wildly misunderstood. There's no methadone, no tapering plans. Instead, you're given a strict routine: bitter herbal teas, long walks in the garden, and mandatory Bible readings. Someone suggests electric therapy. Someone else suggests warm baths. A third person suggests just toughening up, which is very helpful, thank you. And yet, somehow, people do recover. Slowly, painfully, with a lot of dramatic sighing and journal entries that read like Bronte fanfiction. Some go back to their old lives, now permanently suspicious of anything with the word elixir on it. Others become advocates, writing pamphlets titled things like "The Poppy's Poison" or "I Dreamt in Syrup." A few open their own clinics. Because nothing says growth like monetizing your trauma. Meanwhile, governments begin to regulate narcotics. Laws are passed, labels are required, the patent medicine boom slows. Pharmacies are now slightly less enthusiastic about prescribing heroin for hiccups. Society, still reeling from the century-long bender, begins to sober up, and you, recovering addict of the 1890s, stare out your rehab window, watching a world slowly realize that better living through chemistry might need an asterisk. You sip your bitter tea, take a deep breath, and remind yourself, you are more than your prescription. Sleep well, pioneer of recovery. The fog is lifting, one painfully clear day at a time. You're a romantic poet in 1820s London, clutching your laudanum bottle and composing odes to clouds. The only thing higher than your vocabulary is your bloodstream. The fire crackles gently in your boarding house garret. Rain drums against the windows like the melancholy thoughts in your heart. You are 27, pale from candlelight and social anxiety, and you have a poem due for the magazine Blackwoods. You stare at your ink-stained fingers, exhale tragically, and reach once more for your trusted creative lubricant. A bottle of laudanum, opium tincture, mixed with alcohol, and the deep sigh of an overworked chemist. This is the era of the Romantic poets, and you are one of them. Or at least, you dress like one. The movement is all about emotion, nature, beauty, and standing near cliffs while dramatically contemplating mortality. And while many are fueled by long walks and existential dread, others, like you, prefer inspiration with a dropper. Your heroes are Coleridge, De Quincey, Byron, towering figures of the literary scene, draped in scarves, scandal, and just a whisper of opiate breath. Samuel Taylor Coleridge is your personal favorite. He penned Kubla Khan in an opium haze so potent that he reportedly forgot the ending mid-sentence when a visitor interrupted him. You read that story and thought, "This is the life I want. Chaos. Genius. And hopefully, enough coin left for rent." And so, like many aspiring poets of the age, you begin each evening with a small, careful dose of laudanum, just enough to loosen the thoughts, to make the metaphors ripple like a pond disturbed by swans, to elevate your soul slightly above your body, where it can observe things more poetically. The result? You write an ode to the moon so powerful it makes your landlady cry. Or maybe that was the smell of your laundry. Hard to say. Opium and the arts have been a thing for centuries, but in the 19th century, it's practically institutional. Writers, painters, composers, everyone's doing it, or at least tolerating it. No one blinks when you order a double dose with your tea. In fact, it's considered quite sophisticated. A tortured genius should be slightly chemically askew. Helps with the rhythm. Thomas de Quincey even wrote a whole book about it. Confessions of an English Opium Eater. It's part diary, part fever dream, part very long argument with a lamppost. It becomes a sensation, read by everyone from nervous clergy to aspiring teenage poets. De Quincey details his dreams, his insights, his horror, and his slightly inconvenient addiction. But it's beautifully written, and that makes it feel romantic rather than horrifying. That's the vibe of the age. If it ruins your life but the prose is exquisite, it's probably fine. Lord Byron, meanwhile, might not have needed opium. He had enough scandal in his bloodstream already. But it certainly didn't hurt his mythos. You suspect the man could write a sonnet while fencing on a gondola and drinking laudanum from a golden chalice, and then seduce your sister and your dog. Byron was a lifestyle, not just a poet. And you? You're caught in the middle, half committed to the aesthetic, half just trying to meet a deadline. 1 part genius, 2 parts slightly damp. You scribble verses about dying flowers, haunted forests, and the beauty of fog. Your editor writes back, "Less fog, more structure." You sigh, dose again, and add a stanza about how time is an illusion and language is a prison. But deep down, something stirs. A worry, a whisper. Maybe it's not the poetry writing you, it's the laudanum. Maybe your muse is a poppy plant in a glass bottle. And maybe the reason you can't sleep, can't eat, and sometimes mistake your own coat for a raccoon is because the price of inspiration is getting a little steep. Still, the world applauds your pain. Your poems are published. People weep. Someone sends you a lemon tart and a marriage proposal. You stare out the window and wonder what the sea smells like. Sleep well, poet of the poppy. The clouds you write about may be inside your rock head, but they're beautiful, all the same. It's the roaring 20s. Booze is illegal, but your favorite speakeasy has a secret menu, and everyone's talking about the mysterious new guy with the Turkish pipes. You duck through the alley behind the butcher shop, knock 3 times on the back door, whisper a password that changes every Tuesday, and step into a velvet-drenched underworld where jazz plays softly over the sound of moral ambiguity. The lights are low, the patrons are high, and behind the bar, tucked between the gin bottles and the pickle jar, is something even more illicit than bathtub gin. A box of imported Turkish opium wrapped in silk and extremely bad decisions. It's the 1920s, and America is in full-blown prohibition mode. Alcohol is banned, people are furious, so they do what humans have always done when told no: they get creative. The speakeasy is born, a hidden club for sipping, swaying, and sidestepping federal agents. But the booze isn't the only thing flowing. As one vice goes underground, others dig tunnels next to it. And opium, with its slow-burning allure and promise of soft oblivion, slips right in. You take a seat in the back. The new guy arrives, smooth, silent, dressed like a magician who does crimes on weekends. He unrolls a velvet pouch containing long, curved opium pipes. The regulars glance over. The band plays louder. The den transforms. It's no longer just a bar. It's a temple to narcotic escapism, the kind of place where time melts and no one asks questions. Unless it's, "Can I borrow your pillow?" Opium dens had never quite gone away. Even after waves of anti-Chinese sentiment in the late 19th century tried to push them out of American cities, the dens adapted. They moved. They morphed. And now, in the lawless vacuum of prohibition, they're thriving again, quieter than the raucous bootlegging operations, but just as illegal, and arguably more stylish. There are jazz musicians passed out, next to poets. Bootleggers who moonlight as poppy dealers. Flappers with smoky eyes and even smokier hobbies. You try a puff. The smoke curls into your brain like a whisper from the moon. The room softens. The music slows. You forget why you were mad earlier. Something about rent, war, raisins, in baked goods. It doesn't matter. You're drifting, and the city, once noisy and bright, is now just background music for your reverie. But this isn't just a vibe, it's a business. Enter the underworld. Organized crime, always ready to diversify, expands into opiates. Opium, morphine, and even heroin start showing up in coded shipments and hollowed-out books. Chinese and European suppliers work with American gangs to meet the demand. Everything is hush-hush. Payoffs are made. Judges are bribed. And occasionally, someone gets tossed into a river for forgetting who they're dealing with. Law enforcement tries to keep up, but it's like playing whack-a-mole with ghosts. Speakeasies get raided, only to reopen 2 blocks over. Dens go mobile. Opium parlors on wheels. You hear rumors of a pharmacy in Brooklyn that sells headache powder strong enough to erase your childhood. And then, inevitably, comes the moral panic. Newspapers scream about the dope fiend menace. Cartoons show gangsters luring children with gumdrops and jazz. Politicians clutch pearls and draft laws. By the 1920s, the groundwork for America's war on drugs is being laid, slowly, loudly, and with zero understanding of addiction or human behavior. Meanwhile, you're still in the back of the club, watching the smoke drift past a saxophone solo, wondering if anyone else sees the floor doing the Charleston. The high is wearing off. The city is waiting. Outside, a new decade looms, harder, colder, and less forgiving. But for now, There's velvet on the walls, music in the air, and a little more smoke in your lungs than is probably advisable. Sleep well, speakeasy dreamer, tomorrow's bust, is tonight's lullaby. You're a colonial administrator trying to balance the books. Unfortunately, the only thing holding your empire together is opium revenue and a shared sense of moral confusion. It's the early 20th century, and you've just spilled tea on your quarterly ledger. Again, you're sitting in a sweltering office somewhere in the imperial periphery. Maybe Rangoon, maybe Calcutta, maybe a gently crumbling mansion in Saigon with too many ceiling fans and not enough plausible deniability. Your job is to keep the colony functional, the crown happy, and the locals, let's say, manageable. The problem is, your entire economy hinges on a plant that half the world is trying to forget they're addicted to: opium. Glorious, sticky, budget-saving opium. You didn't invent the trade. That was generations ago, back when powdered wigs and extremely confident sailing were in fashion. But you inherited it. Just like the antique desk, the outdated maps, and the increasingly sarcastic telegrams from London. And now, it's your problem. The empire has gotten used to opium profits, the military campaigns, the railway projects, the awkward statues of Queen Victoria in climates she never visited. They all run on poppy paste. You try to explain this to your superior, who responds by reminding you that officially, the empire is against addiction. Unofficially, it's still funding hospitals with money from state-run opium farms. You nod solemnly. File that under colonial logic and go back to bribing local officials with polite dinners and agricultural incentives. The local farmers are equally confused. One day they're told poppy is patriotic. The next, it's a moral crisis. Then it's subsidized. Then banned. Then subsidized again. But only on Tuesdays, and only if exported to a country that hasn't caught on yet. You host a town hall to explain. No one attends. You don't blame them. Back in the capital, the mood is shifting. Reformers are getting loud. Missionaries are writing pamphlets titled things like "The Empire's Shame, Narcotics and Nobility." Parliament is holding hearings. A bishop cries during testimony. Someone uses the word degeneracy at least 5 times. You receive a strongly worded memo suggesting a full review of opium's place in civil society. And you pin it to the corkboard under the header, "Good intentions, no budget." Meanwhile, the actual situation on the ground is a mess. Addiction rates are high. So are the local soldiers. You start noticing that your clerks are very sleepy in the mornings and very emotional about sunsets. The postmaster has begun writing poetry. The head of sanitation claims he's discovered a new kind of pigeon that doesn't exist. You consider retiring. You don't. Instead, you draft a new plan. Slowly reduce opium output, redirect farmers toward tea or cotton, and replace lost revenue with something vaguely modern like rubber exports or taxes. You present it at a board meeting. Everyone nods encouragingly, then immediately approves a new opium shipment to fund a bridge. It's not that no one cares. It's just that opium is too useful. It's cash flow in a capsule, a temporary peacekeeper, a colonial shortcut. Every time someone tries to phase it out, another war, famine, or infrastructure project pops up that says, "Hey, remember poppies?" So you go on, balancing morality and logistics like a bureaucratic acrobat, hosting opium education conferences next to opium storage facilities, writing reports with titles like "On the Strategic Necessity of Transitional Narcotic Economies." At night, you lie awake under a buzzing fan, staring at the ceiling, wondering what your legacy will be. Eventually, the empire fades. Decolonization comes. You retire with a pension, a collection of unread reports, and a nagging sense that maybe, just maybe, the whole thing could have been handled differently. Sleep well. Administrator of the inescapable contradiction, the ledgers are closed. The empire is history. But the hangover? That'll linger a while. It's the 1920s. The world decides to outlaw opium, heroin, morphine, and probably fun. International paperwork increases by 4,000%. Smuggling gets 10 times more creative. You're sitting in a mahogany-paneled meeting room in Geneva, surrounded by mustaches and monocles. It's the post-World War I era, and everyone is still a little traumatized, a little idealistic, and very excited about international cooperation. The League of Nations, humanity's first large-scale attempt at a global group project, is in full swing, and today's agenda is very ambitious. Stop drugs. All of them. Forever. You represent a respectable European power, or at least you think you still do, and you've been sent to participate in what the newspapers are calling the Great Narcotics Reckoning. There are delegates from everywhere. Suit-clad Americans, stiff British gentlemen, chain-smoking Frenchmen, and exactly one person from Siam who's deeply regretting his choice of shoes. Together, you're meant to design a worldwide policy to end the opium crisis once and for all. It starts well enough. Speeches are made. Pens are passed around. Everyone agrees that addiction is bad, trafficking is worse, and the current system, which mostly involves yelling at smugglers while secretly profiting from them, is unsustainable. A resolution is drafted. Then another. And another. Soon the Committee on Narcotics is churning out treaties faster than you can say unintended consequences. The result? A flurry of new rules. Opium is to be regulated. Heroin and morphine must be tracked. Only certified medical personnel can prescribe narcotics. Trade routes are to be monitored, and a brand new International Opium Convention is signed, stamped, and celebrated over espresso and vaguely judgmental toast. On paper, it looks great. In reality, absolute chaos. You return home and try to implement the new rules. Your customs agents are immediately overwhelmed. Your pharmacists are confused. Your doctors are outraged. And your black market? Thrilled. Because while the League may have intended to tighten the global noose around narcotics, what it mostly did was create a booming job market for smugglers, forgers, and clever teenagers with hollow shoes. Overnight, demand for opium doesn't drop, it skyrockets. What was once legal and labeled is now forbidden and extremely profitable. Smuggling routes light up like a Christmas tree. Opium caravans detour through mountain passes. Heroin crosses oceans in cans of soup. Morphine ends up sewn into coats, baked into bread, or disguised as novelty soap. Every time you close one loophole, 3 more open, often wearing top hats and speaking 5 languages. And the smugglers aren't the only ones evolving. Entire criminal enterprises spring up, professionalizing the narcotics business with board meetings, distribution chains, and secret codes that sound like jazz riffs. The cartels of the future? This is their awkward, ambitious adolescence. Meanwhile, back in Geneva, the League keeps writing memos. More paperwork, more regulations. A treaty here, a strongly worded suggestion there. Enforcement, however, remains optional. You start to suspect that the only people truly benefiting from this system are bureaucrats and paper manufacturers. Still, something shifts. For the first time in history, addiction is being framed as a global issue, something that transcends borders, politics, and personal shame. Public health campaigns begin. Educational materials appear. Medical communities start using the word treatment more often than punishment. The movement toward compassion is slow, clumsy, and buried under a mountain of red tape, but it's there. And you, the idealistic delegate from Geneva, sip your tepid tea and wonder if maybe, just maybe, you've helped start something real. Even if it's going to take a few more wars, a few thousand more arrests, and a significant reduction in international sarcasm. Sleep well, treaty dreamer. The paperwork is filed, the pens are capped, and the ban is official. What happens next? Well, let's just say the smugglers are already 2 steps ahead. Welcome to 1940s Los Angeles. Movie stars, jazz musicians, and doctors with the worst handwriting in history. Everyone's on something, and nobody's talking about it. The war is over. The dresses are floor length, and the lighting is always flattering. You've made it to Hollywood in its most glamorous, most suspiciously glossy era. You arrive by train, because all cool people do. Step onto the platform in your best fedora, or your worst heels, and are immediately offered a cigarette, a screen test, and a drink that may or may not contain more barbiturates than bourbon. The studios are thriving. The gossip columns are buzzing. And somewhere, behind a soundstage, a young actress is being handed a little bottle from a studio doctor with a wink, and the kind of medical license that may or may not be printed on cocktail napkin stock. Inside that bottle, a cocktail of poppy-based relaxants designed to keep the stars pretty, productive, and just coherent enough to say their lines before dramatically fainting into a chaise lounge. You get a job as a studio assistant, your primary duty, making sure the starlet doesn't fall asleep during the dance number. She's been on laudanum for her nerves since her last 3 marriages dissolved in press releases and Dior. Her leading man is no better, charming, chiseled, and completely unable to memorize dialogue without a tiny envelope hidden in his vest. And this is normal. Everyone's just a little bit on something. The jazz musicians, they call it chasing the dragon and consider it a performance enhancer. The screenwriters, laudanum for inspiration, morphine for writer's block, and heroin for the premiere. Even the producers are dosing themselves into a mellow haze of financial risk-taking and sexual harassment. But no one talks about it. Not officially. The studio publicists are experts in cover-ups. You don't overdose, you suffer from exhaustion. You don't get arrested with a needle in your glove compartment, you're taking a break from public appearances. Entire scripts are rewritten around withdrawal symptoms. Entire films are delayed because someone mistook the floor for a staircase. And the audience? They suspect nothing. Or maybe they suspect everything. But the dresses are so sparkly and the men so well lit that it feels unkind to ask questions. These are America's sweethearts, its war heroes, its tragic ingenues and rakish anti-heroes. If they need a little something to keep the smile going, well, who doesn't? The pharmacies are discreet. The prescriptions are vague. Nervous disorder could mean anything from stage fright to full-blown hallucinations involving Frank Sinatra's ghost, even though he's still alive. Doctors are on call 24/7, slipping amphetamines in the morning and opiates at night. It's a chemically curated dream machine designed to shine brightly. Even if everyone's running on fumes and morphine, behind the glitz and the camera lenses, addiction grows like ivy, quiet, persistent, and artfully concealed behind soft filters. Stars like Judy Garland, Marilyn Monroe, and others become poster children not just for fame but for fragility. The pills in their purses outnumber the bobby pins. The performances are brilliant, but the crash is inevitable. And when one of them finally breaks down, a nervous collapse, a health retreat, a tragic accident. The press never uses the word addiction, and certainly not opium, but the bottles tell a different story. Still labeled, still prescribed, still present on every mahogany vanity and gold-trimmed nightstand. Still, for all the fog and facade, the legacy of these stars burns bright. Their talent, even chemically tangled, shaped generations. Their stories became legends. Their pain, though hidden behind eyeliner and press junkets, was real, and often rooted in a bottle labeled for anxiety. Sleep well, Hollywood dreamer. The lights have dimmed, the scene is wrapped, and the stars above the city still shine, just like the ones who once burned too brightly below. You're a secret agent. Your mission: win hearts, minds, and the opium fields of Southeast Asia. You spend half your time in jungles, the other half explaining budget overruns. It's the 1960s. The Cold War is sizzling. Vietnam is a jungle blender of geopolitics and very bad planning. And somewhere in Washington, a man with thick glasses and a cigarette clenched between his teeth says, "We need influence in the region, and also poppies. Lots of poppies. Welcome to the Golden Triangle, where Laos, Myanmar, then Burma, and Thailand meet in a fog of humid mountains, geopolitical tension, and some of the world's most lucrative opium crops. You parachute into the scene in your finest camouflage, mosquito-bitten, overfunded, and morally flexible. The problem is, the Viet Cong are gaining ground, and the US government needs allies. Fast. Enter local warlords, tribal militias, and mysterious freedom fighters with a strong dislike for communism and an even stronger connection to opium production. You strike a deal, they fight the communists. You look the other way while they harvest poppies. Everybody wins, except literally everyone. Soon, your logistics reports start looking odd. One minute you're signing off on supplies for a hospital. The next, you're wondering why that same hospital also ordered 50 extra burlap sacks, all slightly damp and mysteriously pungent. It's fine. It's all in the name of national security. Probably. You hopscotch between mountain villages, CIA airstrips, and seedy Saigon hotels, negotiating with colonels, princes, and opium brokers who wear Rolexes and, quote, Sun Tzu. Your agency, totally not the CIA, wink wink, sets up humanitarian airlifts through a small airline that definitely isn't a front, called Air America. These planes, in theory, carry food and supplies. In reality, they're doing frequent flyer miles for poppy paste. At night, you fall asleep to the sound of insects and plausible deniability. Meanwhile, the heroin produced from all this totally incidental opium starts flooding not just the region, but your own troops. GIs on the ground are tired, scared, and very far from home. And when you're 19 years old, knee-deep in rice paddies and bullets, and someone offers you a quick escape in powder form, well, you don't ask what lab it came from. By the early 1970s, reports show that up to 15% of US servicemen in Vietnam are using heroin regularly. The military brass panics. Congress holds hearings. The press runs headlines like GI junkie crisis. But back in the jungle, the poppy fields remain. Guarded. Lush. Very profitable. And when people ask where all this heroin is coming from, you shuffle some papers and offer a long-winded explanation involving Cold War strategy, economic development, and something called opium diplomacy. It sounds important. No one understands it. The hearing ends. Another shipment takes off. The Golden Triangle soon becomes one of the largest heroin-producing regions in the world. Its output flows through Southeast Asia, into Europe, across the ocean, and straight into urban America, fueling a domestic drug epidemic that nobody quite knows how to stop. At home, heroin becomes synonymous with crime, poverty, and despair. On the books, the source remains unclear. Eventually, as the Vietnam War winds down, so does America's direct involvement in the region. But the infrastructure remains. The alliances linger. The airstrips don't just disappear. And the poppies? Oh, They bloom like nothing happened. You retire early. Your pension is generous. Occasionally, someone writes a book suggesting maybe, just maybe, the CIA turned a blind eye, or both eyes, to Southeast Asia's drug trade in the name of anti-communism. You smile tightly. Say nothing. Sip your coffee. Sleep well, shadow operator. The jungle is quiet now, but the echoes of your mission drift on, through the valleys, across the borders, and into every powder-filled paper bag. It's the late 20th century. Big Pharma has a solution for everything, and it rhymes with OxyContin. Suddenly, your uncle's bad back is a family affair. It's 1996, and you're sitting in a doctor's office with beige wallpaper and a framed inspirational poster of a waterfall. The doctor nods sympathetically as you describe your back pain, likely caused by decades of bad posture and your tragic misunderstanding of gym equipment. He writes a prescription with the speed and confidence of someone handing out Halloween candy. The name on the bottle? OxyContin, time-released relief for modern suffering, wrapped in a sleek little capsule and more addictive than your favorite childhood cereal. You don't know it yet, but you're on the front lines of a pharmaceutical revolution/disaster. The late 20th century brings us the internet, denim vests, and, most notably, pain management as a lifestyle. Big Pharma, ever helpful and deeply sincere in its pursuit of quarterly profits, begins aggressively marketing a new class of opioid-based painkillers. These drugs, built on the same chemistry as the humble poppy plant, are pitched as safe, effective, and scientifically non-addictive, if taken as prescribed, which of course works exactly until it doesn't. Pharmaceutical reps sweep across America like caffeinated missionaries. They bring free pens, catered lunches, glossy brochures, and data sheets that may or may not be missing footnotes. Doctors are wooed. Clinics are stocked. Patients are assured that chronic pain is a disease, and that relief is just a pill away. You take one. The pain softens. You take another. You sleep better. 3 weeks later, your tolerance has adjusted, and your personality has, too. You've developed strong opinions about lawn care, and you're pretty sure you can hear your bones whispering when the dosage wears off. The doctor doubles your script. Then again, and suddenly, what started as relief becomes necessity. What was once a solution becomes a ritual. And you're not alone. Across the country, prescriptions skyrocket. People with bad backs, sore knees, dental pain, or just a vague sense of malaise are popping pills like they're Tic Tacs from Mount Olympus. The pills are legal, easy to get, and come in bottles with names like extended release, which basically means slow descent into dependency. The companies behind these drugs release glowing reports. One family in particular, whose name rhymes suspiciously with crackler, rakes in billions and funds museum wings with the enthusiasm of a PR team in crisis mode. Their ads show smiling grandparents playing tennis. The fine print is elusive. But then the cracks start to show. Communities across America begin to change. Small towns see a spike in overdoses. ER visits climb. People start doctor hopping, collecting prescriptions like trading cards. Pill mills open and flourish. Entire counties become pharmacy parking lots with a side of despair. Families notice their loved ones aren't better. They're missing, emotionally at first. Then, sometimes, entirely. Addiction becomes epidemic. Lawsuits begin to pile up. Whistleblowers step forward. And eventually the headlines catch up to reality. The opioid crisis is here, and it's not the users who lit the match, it's the manufacturers. Suddenly, the painkiller narrative shifts. What was once a miracle cure is now a national emergency. Governments scramble to respond. Doctors tighten their prescribing practices. Patients are left hanging, many turning to street drugs like heroin or fentanyl when their legal supply disappears overnight. The cycle continues. Harder, deadlier, and now underground. And you? You're stuck in the middle. Your prescription ends, but the pain hasn't. Neither has the craving. The withdrawal feels like your bones have decided to rebel, and the flu has moved in permanently. You don't want to be addicted. You just want it to stop hurting. Sleep well, weary soul. The bottle may be empty, but the conversation is just beginning. The poppy didn't go away. It just changed outfits. You're scrolling headlines in the 21st century. The poppy fields are still burning, fortunes are still rising and falling, and somehow, nobody's fixed anything. It's the modern world. You have Wi-Fi, online grocery delivery, and at least 3 streaming platforms yelling at you to watch things you'll never finish. But behind all the avocado toast and algorithmic doom scrolling, the same ancient red flower is still doing its thing, ruining lives, funding wars, and laughing quietly from a distant field in Helmand province. Afghanistan is the epicenter now. It's not just rugged terrain and geopolitical headaches. It's the world's leading opium producer. Every year, entire harvests of poppies sway gently in the dry wind, while international officials insist that this year they're really going to crack down. Spoiler, they do not crack down. They don't even politely tap. You're a soldier, maybe. Or a journalist. Or just a guy with a drone hobby. And too much curiosity. Either way, you're standing near a poppy field that stretches farther than your cell reception. You ask the local farmer why he grows poppies and not, say, wheat. He looks at you, laughs, and says something to the effect of, "You can't feed your family with freedom." He has a point. Despite billions in aid and decades of intervention, the opium economy in Afghanistan never really went away. In fact, it flourished. US and NATO troops came and went. Civilian contractors came and really stayed. And all the while, poppy cultivation soared. Everyone knew it was happening. Nobody had a plan that didn't immediately fall apart upon contact with reality. Meanwhile, in Mexico, the cartels were watching with interest. The heroin trade, once an offshoot of other more lucrative schemes, becomes central. Poppy cultivation spreads into the hills of Guerrero. New laboratories rise. Smuggling routes adapt. Street-level heroin, especially cheap and especially lethal, starts creeping north into the US, riding on the back of the painkiller epidemic like a vulture on a dying horse. And then comes fentanyl. Fentanyl, the overachieving little sibling of heroin, is not technically derived from poppies, but its arrival is still part of the same tragic family reunion. It's synthetic, strong enough to tranquilize a woolly mammoth, and easy to manufacture in labs that don't require good ventilation or a conscience. It floods the market. Overdose deaths spike. Governments panic. Cartels adapt again. Less farming, more chemistry. You're no longer dealing with farmers. You're dealing with logistics experts with machetes. Back in your city, you see the symptoms. People sleeping on sidewalks with eyes open. Overdose kits in public parks. News reports about record-breaking seizures and record-breaking deaths. You scroll past them while sipping a latte that cost more than a dose of something that could end a life. The scale is mind-bending. The response? Often a shrug and a budget cut. But the poppy's revenge isn't just about drugs. It's about economics, corruption, desperation. It's about failed policies and forgotten promises. It's about entire generations of farmers, soldiers, patients, and users caught in a system that profits off their pain and then politely pretends not to notice. And yet, it's still going, still growing, From ancient Sumer to Silk Road smugglers to Victorian parlor, tables to today's overdose epidemic, opium has proven one thing. It doesn't go away. It just changes uniforms. You close the article, turn off your phone, think about the future. Sleep well, modern wanderer. The world may be digital now, but the problems are still grown in soil. And the flower? It's still blooming, red as ever. You try to drift off to sleep, but the history of opium lingers, equal parts nightmare and lullaby, a story that never quite ends. One last deep breath, and you realize history isn't just something that happened. Sometimes it's something you can feel in your bones. The poppy is quiet now. Somewhere it's blooming, soft petals, bright red, delicate as a sigh. But behind that beauty, centuries of whispered deals, battlefield surgeries, royal scandals, crumpled prescriptions, and factory-farmed despair. It's a flower with more baggage than a Victorian honeymooner, and it's been riding shotgun in humanity's story for over 5,000 years, rarely asking for directions. You close your eyes. Behind them, a flicker reel plays. A Sumerian priest crushes dried pods in a temple mortar. An Egyptian embalmer mixes tinctures for the afterlife. A Roman noble stirs a few drops into his goblet. A medieval monk counts poppy seeds like their prayers. A Chinese merchant watches his empire unravel in smoke. A British official signs one more shipment order with a stiff upper lip and a bottomless sense of denial. A jazz musician taps out a rhythm while the pipe smoke curls into the shape of something he's been trying to forget. A pharmacist in 1997 adjusts his tie and tells the rep, "Sure, let's give it a try." And you, here, now, just trying to sleep, with all of that woven into the pillows of modern life. Because even if you've never touched the stuff, chances are someone you know has. A prescription that spiraled, a pain that didn't go away, a moment that turned into a habit that turned into a silence. Opium and its many slick, lab-enhanced descendants still haunts the present, drifting through hospital corridors, into voting booths, under bridges, and through boardrooms. It's a paradox, a plant that both saved and destroyed, a painkiller that often led to more pain, a comfort that curdled. People turned to it for peace, for sleep, for silence, and in small doses, it gave them all three. But the price? Always due, always in full. Governments rose on its profits, others crumbled in its wake. Artists praised it, soldiers cursed it, doctors misunderstood it, and entire nations played hot potato with its responsibility. The poppy, meanwhile, just kept growing, unbothered, unimpressed, and possibly laughing a little. And maybe that's the most haunting part. That something so soft, so quiet, could be behind so much noise. You breathe in. The present surrounds you, clean sheets, dim light, distant hum of traffic or fan or silence. But somewhere deeper, your ancestors stir. Some with war wounds packed in poppy poultices. Some with bottles hidden in bedside drawers. Some who barely survived the days when pain was a constant companion. And the only relief came with a label that said soothing elixir but may as well have said, "See you in 3 weeks." This is the weight of history. Not always heavy, but persistent. A thread pulled through time, a fog that never quite clears. And yet, you're still here, still breathing, still learning, still curious enough to want the story, even when it's ugly. So sleep well, traveler. You've wandered through centuries of empire, medicine, madness, and marketing. You've survived the Silk Road, the Senate, the saloon, and the suburbs. You've walked beside pharaohs, pharmacists, poets, and pushers, and now, finally, you've reached your pillow. Close your eyes. Let the poppy rest. You've made it to morning. You're a French soldier sweating in the Egyptian sun, dodging musket balls and sand fleas. Suddenly, the army doctor hands you a mysterious elixir, Napoleon's answer to everything from dysentery to boredom. Turns out, conquering the East means picking up more than just a tan. You also inherit a serious opium habit. It's 1798, and you're part of Napoleon Bonaparte's Egyptian expedition, a brilliant military campaign, and also, coincidentally, a great way to get heat stroke and lice in the same afternoon. The goal? Establish French dominance in the East, cut off British access to India, and maybe steal some ancient artifacts while you're at it. You personally are hoping for glory, gold, or at least a good tan. What you get instead? Diarrhea and addiction. The Egyptian campaign is a logistical nightmare. The heat is unbearable, the food questionable, and the sanitation situation is medieval at best. Disease spreads through the ranks faster than Napoleon can draft his next self-aggrandizing letter. Enter the French military medical corps, armed with a new weapon in their prus, medicinal arsenal, opium. You're handed a small vial. The doctor tells you it will soothe the stomach, ease your nerves, and make you forget the number of dead camels you've stepped over today. You take it, you don't ask questions. That's not the French way. You're in Egypt, baby, where the poppies are plentiful and nobody has invented a user warning label yet. Opium isn't new, of course. The Egyptians have been using it for centuries. But this is your first brush with the plant of joy. And oh, what joy it brings. For a brief moment, you forget that your tent is a glorified curtain, that your boots are melting, and that the locals absolutely do not want you here. You float above it all, detached and mildly euphoric, watching the desert blur into soft watercolor. Napoleon, ever the opportunist, quickly realizes that opium isn't just good medicine. It's French medicine. Now, his doctors begin prescribing it for nearly everything. Fever, pain, infection, existential dread. You're not sure if you're recovering or hallucinating, but either way, you don't mind. The stuff works. And you're not alone. Entire units of French soldiers begin depending on it. What started as a temporary field remedy becomes a battlefield necessity. After all, it's hard to mutiny when you're busy napping under your horse. Meanwhile, back in Europe, the Enlightenment is in full swing, and French intellectuals are getting wind of this magical Eastern remedy. They start importing it not just as medicine, but as philosophy in liquid form. Writers and scholars wax poetic about Oriental opiates, sipping laudanum while pondering the meaning of liberty, equality, and whether or not they left the oven on. The irony, of course, is delicious. A campaign meant to conquer Egypt ends with Egypt quietly conquering France's bloodstream. When the troops eventually return home, they bring more than just mummies and tales of desert valor. They bring a new national habit. And, while Napoleon never quite gets the empire he dreamed of in the East, he does succeed in exporting and importing something less tangible, but far more lasting: dependency. So you're back in Paris now. Your uniform is moth-eaten. Your stories are mostly about gastrointestinal trauma. And your taste for opium? Still going strong. The apothecary knows you by name. Your friends assume you're just contemplative and brooding. But you? You're chasing the same numbness you found under a palm tree outside Cairo. Sleep well, soldier of the empire. The campaign is over, the sun has set, but the poppy? The poppy remains. You've survived storms, scurvy, and a chef with violent opinions about salt pork. Now, as the ship rocks in the South China Sea, the captain prescribes a dose of laudanum for your nerves. Opium barrels double as both medical supply and pirate currency. Sea shanties get much weirder after midnight. It's the 18th or early 19th century, and you're aboard a merchant vessel, or perhaps a pirate ship, depending on who's asking and how recently you've paid taxes. The sea is wide, the horizon endless, and hygiene strictly optional. You've been at sea for months, your skin is peeling, your teeth are plotting an escape, and your only real companion is the ship's cat, who might be a ghost. The official medicine chest, kept under lock and key in the captain's quarters, includes a generous stockpile of opium-based remedies, laudanum, paregoric, tinctures of comfort, all packed into glass bottles that rattle ominously in rough waters. The crew knows the drill. You've got a headache? Opium. Seasick? Opium. Toothache, heartbreak, or mysterious jungle rash? Guess what? More opium. It's not recreational. At least, not officially. But after your third encounter with a rogue wave and the first mate's terrible harmonica solo, a little chemical escape becomes not just tolerated, but encouraged. It's easier to manage a ship full of men who are too mellow to mutiny. You take your nightly dose with a splash of rum, stare at the stars, and hum a tune about a mermaid who definitely ghosted you. The laudanum hums in your veins, smoothing out the creaks of the hull, and the existential horror of being a floating speck in the void. The ocean's chaos becomes lullaby. You stop caring that the anchor chain is held together by optimism and barnacle glue. But opium's role at sea isn't just medicinal. It's economic. You're smack in the middle of the maritime opium trade, whether you know it or not. British, Dutch, Portuguese, Chinese, everyone wants a cut. Ships that once hauled spices and porcelain are now loaded with poppy derivatives bound for eager markets, particularly along the Chinese coast. Entire fleets are floating pharmacies with questionable morals and very solid profit margins. Pirates, too, are in on it. The South China Sea is crawling with corsairs who know that a barrel of raw opium can buy more loyalty than nutras. Gold. It's lightweight, portable, and far more addictive than your average plunder. Some crews switch entirely to smuggling, trading cutlasses for opium pipes. It's safer, and ironically, much more intoxicating. And let's not forget the shanties. After a few weeks on the source, the ship's songs take on a surreal tone. You're no longer singing about lost loves and drunken nights. You're warbling about talking dolphins and boats made of toast. Someone insists the moon winked at them. Someone else has started writing a musical called Poppy, the Sea Witch. It's a hit among the rats. Still, there's a darker undertow. By the time you dock, half the crew is either asleep, euphoric, or having intense philosophical debates with the mast. Withdrawals are brutal, supplies run dry, tempers flare, and what started as a mild solution for back pain ends with you curled in your hammock, sweating through your shirt and muttering about mermaids who definitely weren't there. When you finally reach port, you stagger onto land like it's made of marshmallows. The world tilts. The birds are too loud. You crave more laudanum, but your coin purse is empty, and the apothecary says you look haunted. Which, to be fair, you do. Sleep well, sailor of the smoky sea. The waves have calmed, the bottle's corked, and the storm, internal or otherwise, has passed. For now, just don't ask what's in tomorrow's rations, or why the cat is wearing your hat. You're wandering 19th century Paris in a velvet coat that smells faintly of despair. Every painter you know has a stash of something stronger than turpentine. Impressionist masterpieces are born in a haze of candlelight and questionable herbal teas. Somewhere between the Moulin Rouge and a poetry slam, you realize that inspiration is, technically, a controlled substance. It's the Belle Epoque, a time of champagne dreams and dangerously flammable art studios. You haven't paid rent in 3 months. Your latest sculpture is a pile of broken umbrellas. And your breakfast was 3 almonds and an absinthe rinse. But creativity is in the air, and in your tea, your lozenges, and whatever that apothecary handed you when you said, "I'm feeling creatively blocked." Poppy derivatives like laudanum and morphine have made their way into the bohemian bloodstream, not as tools of addiction yet, but as companions to the muse. Everyone swears a little something helps the creative process. Van Gogh drinks coffee by the litre, but Toulouse-Lautrec? He's on his third special tonic before lunch. And you? You dabble. You're in a smoky attic studio in Montmartre. The walls are covered in unfinished canvases and aggressive wallpaper. Your roommate is asleep under a chair. There's a bottle of something amber-colored beside your paint-streaked mattress labeled simply, "For nerves." You don't remember who gave it to you, but it rhymes with addiction. You take a sip, not much. Just enough for the brush to flow a little easier, for the hands to stop trembling, for the midnight jitters to morph into artistic clarity. The world blurs into color. You decide the Eiffel Tower is lonely and deserves a friend. You begin sketching a giraffe in a bowler hat next to it. Art. Down the street, in Vienna, similar things are happening, except everyone is wearing more buttons and quietly unraveling. Freud is just beginning to psychoanalyze everything that moves. And coincidentally, also experimenting with cocaine. But the musicians? The poets? Oh, they're living for opium. It's the velvet hammer of the creative soul. Composers hum fugues between sips of morphine tea. Operas are written in 3-day binges fueled by poppy syrup and suppressed emotions. Gustav Klimt is painting women who seem to melt into gold leaf and forgotten dreams. Everyone's work is brilliant. Everyone's personal life is, to put it gently, a soup made of feelings and unmailed letters. You meet other artists at cafes with names like Le Chat Déprimé, the depressed cat, and order pastries you can't afford. Conversations drift from color theory to the meaning of melancholy to, "Should we try that new opium blend Jacques is brewing?" Someone brings out a small pipe. You don't say no. The effects are cozy at first. Ideas arrive more smoothly. You stop second-guessing your brushstrokes. You're painting like a maniac, or perhaps just a man who hasn't slept. Your friends applaud. A critic calls your latest work a lucid descent into madness. You add it to your resume. But the fog creeps in. After a while, the elixirs stop being magical. The inspiration dulls. The come-down sharpens. The things you painted last night? Kind of terrifying. The giraffe now has 6 eyes and is possibly crying. You begin waking with headaches that feel like you angered a particularly vengeful ghost. You try to cut back, but the city doesn't make it easy. Every alley has a cure. Every cure has a side effect. You're chasing the spark, but now it's sprinting ahead of you, laughing in iambic pentameter. Eventually, you sell a painting. It's enough to buy bread, a new sketchbook, and slightly less opium. You call it progress. Sleep well, troubled genius. Your canvas is covered. Your coat still smells weird. And the muse, half hallucination, half hope, has curled up at your feet. The night may be long, but the art, at least, endures. It's 1905. And your favorite newspaper is selling miracle cures for everything from neuralgia to shyness. Every bottle is 40% opium, 60% wishful thinking, and 100% legal. You're beginning to suspect that Grandma's soothing syrup is why she never worries about anything, except running out. Welcome to the glorious, glittery snake oil parade of early 20th century medicine, where your most pressing medical concern isn't the illness. It's which bottle of liquid nonsense to believe in. You, a concerned and thoroughly exhausted parent, pick up the latest issue of the Illustrated American Medical Times and also Gossip magazine, and every ad is shouting at you in curly fonts. Cure drops for cramps and spirits, Mrs. Hensley's calming elixir for infants, adults, and restless ghosts. Dr. McFuzzle's compound tonic, now with triple the ingredients and none of the explanation. It's all very exciting and deadly. You swing by your local pharmacy, or, more accurately, the general store that also sells axe grease and molasses, and ask the teenager behind the counter for something for your nerves. He slides over a bottle with a picture of a serene-looking lady reclining on a crescent moon. It smells like alcohol, despair, and nutmeg. The label reads, "Guaranteed relief, no questions asked," which is good because you have many questions and zero answers. You take a swig. It tastes like regret and cloves. But 5 minutes later, you feel warm, floaty, and vaguely philosophical. You spend the afternoon contemplating the nature of clouds and forget you were supposed to pick up your child from violin lessons again. And you're not alone. The streets are full of it. Bottles tucked into corsets, hidden in lunch pails, and sold openly at Sunday markets. They call it soothing syrup, nerve tonic, or female pills, and each one is a masterclass in branding. It's medicine with a wink. And beneath all that herbal-sounding marketing, a generous helping of opium. Mothers use it to calm their babies. Fathers use it to forget their debts. Teens use it because someone left the cabinet unlocked. And Grandma? She hasn't blinked in 48 hours, but insists she's never felt better. The whole family is mellow, mysterious, and technically overdosing. Advertising is booming. Posters and magazine pages feature healthy, smiling people holding dark glass bottles like they've discovered the fountain of eternal calm. A cheerful man with a mustache tells you his liver tonic cured his bad marriage. A young lady credits her glowing skin to Carter's gentle compound, which also contains morphine, turpentine, and a light dusting of Victorian optimism. Doctors? Some of them are in on it. Others are just as confused as you are. The truth is, medical regulation at this point is more like a suggestion. Labels aren't required to list ingredients, and if they do, it's often written in calligraphy, so elaborate you'd need a magnifying glass and a background in Latin to make sense of it. Eventually, people begin to notice that their harmless tonics are turning neighbors into recliner-bound philosophers with suspicious twitches. The term addiction starts making quiet appearances in hushed conversations. Investigative journalists get involved, and slowly, painfully slowly, governments begin to act. In 1906, the US finally passes the Pure Food and Drug Act, which requires medicines to list ingredients and stop making claims like cures death or turns your baby into a Harvard graduate. It's a start, but the damage is done. The addiction is already seeded across cities, farms, and Sunday dinner tables. And you? You decide to wean off the syrup. You go cold turkey for 2 days before caving and taking just a tiny dose because your cat looked at you funny. And now you're spiraling. Sleep well, gentle consumer. The bottle's in the cupboard, the label now includes warnings, and Grandma's finally switched to herbal tea. Maybe, you think. You're not checking. Not tonight. You're a 1970s seeker, convinced the answers to the universe are tucked away in a Himalayan poppy field. Spiritual gurus promise enlightenment. Instead, you get altitude sickness and lose your sandals to a goat. Turns out, the road to wisdom is paved with questionable herbal experiments and a lot of awkward campfire confessions. It's the age of Aquarius. You've read Siddhartha twice, own an oversized poncho, and have developed strong opinions about incense. Somewhere between a sitar solo and your third group meditation, you decide the West just doesn't get it. There's truth out there. Somewhere, maybe in the East, maybe in a monastery, maybe behind a slightly suspicious tea shop in Kathmandu. So you book a one-way ticket with nothing but a backpack, a notebook full of poetry, and a vague sense that poppies are involved. You land in India, eyes wide and expectations misguided. The air smells like spice, exhaust, and possibility. The plan? Blend in. Seek wisdom. Find the divine. Maybe pick up a few mystic phrases along the way. But the reality is less glamorous. You're sunburned, dehydrated, and 3 days deep into a philosophical debate with a guy named Greg who insists his aura is allergic to soap. Eventually, someone mentions the Himalayas. That's where the real stuff is, they say. You nod solemnly. Yes, the mountains. High altitude thinking. You catch a crowded bus, your knees in someone's armpit, as you rattle toward enlightenment. Or at least a decent nap. Once in the hills, you meet your guide. He speaks 5 languages, smokes constantly, and has 2 teeth. He assures you that, yes, the poppies grow wild here, but he warns, with a chuckle, that they're for special moods only. You don't ask what that means. You're in too deep. Days pass. You camp under stars, drink yak milk tea, and try to journal your way into spiritual clarity. You meet a guru who looks like he was carved from incense smoke. He tells you that suffering is a flower, which feels profound until you realize he might have just misquoted a tea label. Someone breaks out the special tea. It's brewed with local herbs, roots, and, though no one says it out loud, likely opium resin. The first sip is bitter, the second sweet, and the third well. That one starts speaking to you. You lie back against a rock, the sky expanding like a watercolor spill. The fire crackles. Someone's playing a flute with one note. You feel weightless. You understand time. You forgive your high school gym teacher. You see the face of the universe. It's smiling, but it has your dad's mustache. The next morning, you wake up shoeless, halfway down a goat trail, and absolutely sure you made some kind of cosmic breakthrough, you just can't remember what it was. Also, you're 80% sure you tried to marry a tree. It's not the worst night you've had, but it's definitely in the top 10. Back in town, you debrief with other seekers. Turns out, half of them came chasing spiritual clarity and left with digestive issues and a semi-legal export of healing powders. You nod, wiser now, less starry-eyed, more grounded. You've learned something, even if it's just the importance of staying hydrated. Opium, it turns out, is not a shortcut to wisdom. It's a detour, a foggy, fragrant path that sometimes feels like truth but mostly just feels like you've lost your socks and all sense of time. The real journey? That's in the coming back, in reintegrating, in explaining to your parents why you spent $600 on mala beads and forgot your cousin's wedding. So sleep well, seeker of cosmic meaning. The mountain has whispered, the flower has bloomed, and your sandals, may they rest in peace, are now goat food. You may not have found enlightenment, but you definitely found a story, and sometimes that's enough. So tonight, as you drift off in your clean bed, maybe with a heating pad, maybe with a mug of something mercifully over the counter, let's take a soft, foggy moment to look back on the world's longest, weirdest poppy trip. From the ancient Sumerian priest muttering about the joy plant, to the Victorian housewife sipping her medicinal laudanum, to the unfortunate bureaucrat who accidentally started a war because he didn't know what was in the cargo hold. The history of opium is nothing if not a parade of misunderstandings, ambition, and spectacular human resilience. We've wandered through smoky dens, crashed imperial parties, and sailed stormy seas in pursuit of relief, riches, and sometimes just a little peace. Empires have fallen, fortunes have risen, Poets have gotten weird, and every generation swore this time they'd finally solved the poppy problem, usually right before making it worse. The stuff of dreams, the root of nightmares, and a very reliable punchline at 2 a.m. Opium has shaped the world in ways most of us will never quite see, except maybe in the fine print on our cold medicine. But here's the gentle miracle. For all the misery and melodrama, people always kept going, from coughing monks to high society hustlers, from Silk Road smugglers to modern doctors reading warning labels. Our ancestors kept searching for relief, meaning, and, sometimes, the world's best nap. So as you settle into the soft glow of now, be grateful for your era, where you can say no to mystery syrups, where empires are, mostly, not at war over your bedtime routine, and where the poppies in your garden are for Instagram, not international smuggling. Maybe whisper a sleepy thank you to the people who came before. The stubborn, the hopeful, and the hilariously misguided, who somehow managed to survive it all. Because history is always a little bit tragic, a little bit ridiculous, and very, very human. And tonight, it's proof that you, too, can rest easy, knowing that tomorrow's headaches probably won't start a war. Sleep well. The world will still be here in the morning, hopefully with fewer poppies in your medicine cabinet. Good night.